with children. So it's mostly psychological advisory. It's something that is carried out by social workers and psychologists, and they try to settle a couple and convince them that for them it's better to live together rather than to separate, and it's something different than family mediation. That is a procedure before mediators. Family mediation is a process in which family members participate voluntarily, with an exception of the first session of the family mediation before divorce, which is also obligatory for spouses. So, family mediator is a neutral and specially educated person included in the family mediation registry. So, Social Welfare Minister will in the future pass special rules on family mediation. So now we have registry before Minister of Justice for all other mediators, and we have registry for family mediators, and it exists at Social Welfare Ministry. But however, we still don't have the special rules that would give us more information about how to conduct family mediation. And the main purpose of family mediation is to reach a plan regarding issues relevant for a child. However, parties are free to settle property and other disputes during family mediation as well. And parties may consensually propose mediation during the judicial procedure, and the court may propose to the parties to solve the disputes in the family mediation procedure. As Tamás already mentioned, that is a case in Hungary, and Marika was telling something about it yesterday. We in Croatia have multi-door courthouse, which means the court may, during the entire civil procedure, propose to the parties to solve the dispute in court and out of court mediation procedure. Because mediation association was so persistent, we have mediation included in Civil Procedure Act, and we have special norms about mediation in this Civil Procedure Act as of 2013. The in-court mediation procedure is led by the mediator judge, appointed from the list of mediator judges defined by the court president. So these mediators are judges in this specific court, and they are on some kind of list, but they also have to be enlisted in registry before Ministry of Justice. So the mediator judge cannot act as a judge or an arbiter in a dispute that is in the subject matter of a mediation procedure, or in other disputes resulting from or in connection with such legal relationship. The mediation procedure can be initiated before initiation of court procedure, during the court procedure, or upon the submission of legal remedy to the court ruling. The procedure can be conducted before the court, where the litigation is already in course, or at the mediation center. So our practice is that mostly mediations were in-court mediations, and they were conducted before the court, where the litigation is already in course, and it's the most successful evidence of mediation. So, apart from the list that courts have, mediation centers are also organized within other institutions in Croatia, such as Bar Association, Mediation Association, Employers Association, Chambers of Economy, Chambers of Trades and Crafts, etc. And to conclude, I would like to present just one attempt of mediation of same-sex couples that we had with our clients. Actually, one was our client, the other was obviously not our client. So it's the case of two women who were living in a stable relationship for 4 years, and after 4 years they separated. But during these 4 years they were engaged, they lived together, so it was same-sex unions according to our interpretation of the case. And one of these women was our client, and the biggest problem of this case was that they had joint property, and two of these things were a cat and a dog. So it was impossible to settle because neither of them wanted a court proceeding. So they were not keen to go to the court. They wanted to settle, but the problem was that both of them thought that one of them has to have both a dog and a cat. So it was impossible to solve it otherwise than to go to the court proceedings. And we did try mediation, but the other party was not willing to enter into the real procedure of mediation. However, we did exchange a few emails with the lawyer of the other party, and we did try to give some kind of proposal, but it didn't work. So the court proceedings, and this is the case where we can see that when you don't have registered the relationship, it's kind of a problem, because the court firstly needed to recognize that relationship was same-sex unions as defined by the Same-Sex Act. We claimed that it was same-sex union, however, the other party claimed it wasn't, and the court was actually, he denied our proposal, and the court said that the same-sex union wasn't a same-sex union as defined by the Same-Sex Unions Act from 2003, because during their relationship they had some breakups, and we appealed to this decision, this judgment, because we think it's not relevant to this case, because they were engaged, and in case they were provided the right to register, they would have been registered as well. However, they didn't have that right at the time, so that's the reason why their relationship was only informal, which of course doesn't mean that they couldn't have rights that the same-sex union gained to them based on that act. So that's it from my side.
Thank you, Natalia. Any questions? Domande? Sia per Natalia che per Tamas. Anche in italiano, se mai abilitiamo a tradurle. Ok, allora procedo. Now, last but not least, Borislava Daskalova and Walter Pekto is going to deliver a presentation on Bulgaria.
Thank you. We just want to make sure that everybody is awake and that people are concentrated. So we are going to make a very, very short exercise. I hope you enjoy it. An energizer. So the rule is very simple. Whenever you hear me saying a word that starts with the letter B, you need to stand up and sit down again. And it would just take 2 sentences. So, are you ready? Is it clear? Very good. My name is Vladi, and this is my colleague Borislava. Thank you. And we come from Bulgaria. We are very happy to be here in Bergamo. Thank you. We are going to make a collaborative presentation, and we will start with a very short review on how the legislation developed within the years in terms of LGBT community, and then we will speak a bit more about what is the current legislation, especially on same-sex partnership, that is unfortunately pathetic compared to the other partners that we heard, but we'll see now. And we will also give some reflections on from our field interviews. So, let's start.
So there we go. Thank you very much in advance for your patience. It's not easy to listen to presentations in a row. So I'm going to say that it's important to take into consideration that Bulgaria used to be 45 years under socialism. It was considered to be the 16th Russian Republic. Still, the Russians say "Kurica не птица, Bulgaria is a granica," meaning the hen is not a bird, Bulgaria is not abroad. And that determines a lot, the culture and the legal system too. So, same-sex activity is legal since 1968. And age of consent is equalized in 2002. According to the rules for military service, gays and lesbians are allowed. Sexual orientation protection in all areas is accepted since 2003. There is no recognition of same-sex relationships, and same-sex marriage is constitutionally banned. We go further explain. Then adoption. There is something. There is an alarm there in my backpack. Sorry for that. Adoption is quite specific. We'll go back to that actually with the next slides, explaining what's the context of this. But single gay people can adopt most oftentimes when they're females, because Bulgarian culture and legal system is not very friendly to single men being capable to adopt. So we come back to this as well. Bulgaria has been part of the Ottoman Empire until 1878. So, following the independence of Bulgaria from the Ottoman Empire, the country adopted its own penal code. It came into force in May 1896, and homosexual acts between males over 16 years of age, which is interesting and different than the previous countries, became punishable by at least 6 months of imprisonment. And then there is a penal code of March 1951, which increased the penalty. I have to point out that these are the toughest communist times. And of course, that's why it was considered as a very political step of doing it, always reflecting whatever is happening in Soviet Union. So it's 16th Republic, it has to follow. So there was usually first something happening in Moscow and then echoing in Sofia. Then there was a revision of the penal code in May 1968, which removed the sections outlawing homosexual acts. And that again is echoing changes in the Communist Party, which became more liberal. And this actually is happening exactly at the time when all concentration camps were closed in Bulgaria. There were concentration camps and many intellectual homosexuals were there. At the moment they decided to close the camps in Soviet Union, they closed them in Bulgaria, and they also changed this. So it was very historically determined. Again, echoing what happened in Soviet Union in 1964 in July, 3 months after the same thing happening in Moscow, there was a mass arrest of 26 men, most of which were famous actors and singers, having perverted homosexual relationships. And we are citing two of the biggest figures in the Bulgarian culture back then, Georgi Partsalev and Emil Dimitrov, who were also arrested for a while. Experts say it was just a masquerade. I mean, they were trying to pass a message that Western culture is quite decadent, so that's why we try to cut this off. And surprisingly, with the change in the Communist Party leadership, in 1966, they decided to be more human, let's say, because they tried to prove that socialism is a human-loving system. So a group of experts came out with this fantastic statement telling that this can no longer be considered a crime, since lesbians and gays are these real people who shouldn't be punished because they're already suffering, going through this illness. So we really have to be kind. And then on March 1st, 1968, the new criminal code came into force and legalized homosexual acts, which is a radical for the 60s, even in the non-communist states. So just to make a summary of what we said up to now, homosexuality is legal since 1968. Since 2002, there is equal age of consent. Anti-discrimination laws in all areas are accepted since 2003. There are laws against all kinds of hate speech in 2003. And there is also a couple of laws drafted against hate crimes which are waited to be voted by the parliament. And there are no laws actually protecting transgender people yet, There is a public debate on this, and we hope that soon we come up with a draft. Same-sex marriage is not possible. There is no recognition of same-sex marriages as well as civil unions conducted abroad. There was a big debate with France. France was lobbying quite actively, but they did not manage to succeed for Bulgaria to approve the French homosexual civil unions and marriages. There is no recognition even of the couples. No possibility for joint or step adoption by same-sex couples, but adoption by a single homosexual person is possible as soon as this is a woman, because due to recently emerging patriarchal values in Bulgaria. I'm saying recently emerging because Bulgaria is the least patriarchal country in the Balkans. I don't consider Croatia Balkans, that's why. It's the least patriarchal and most secular country indeed, but with the right wing, we start to, they claim re-adopt, but according to my understanding it's just adopt patriarchal values that are dressed with national costumes and pretending to be quite traditional for the country. Assisted fertilization for lesbians is not possible because it is allowed only for married couples, and interestingly enough the Health Insurance Fund is sponsoring it, which is rarely happening in other European Union countries. No commercial surrogacy for gay male couples. It's illegal also for the heterosexual couples. Gays are allowed to serve in the military, as we said, and there is a right to change legal gender, which is interesting from the perspective of investigating the situation of transgender and transsexual people. So now I pass the floor to Vladimir.
Yes, I just will say a few words about the number 0. The number 0 turned out to be very important in our research because a lot of things were 0. For example, the number of legal texts that are governing same-sex couple is 0. With one exception in the penalty code, but it's not in favor of the same-sex couples. Then the number of family-related rights that are given to same-sex couples is again 0. So that's where we are in terms of how developed our legislation is for same-sex couples. According to our research as well, the number of court cases that are dealing with same-sex couples is 0. Of course, it is possible that we missed a case, but we made a request to the biggest courthouses, and if they don't have any cases, we assume that the smaller ones in the countryside, it's even much less probable. We also contacted mediation associations asking if there were mediation cases of same-sex couples, and guess what? The answer was 0. As well, the number of, this is as well our presumption that at least to our knowledge and based on our research and our outreach within the community, there are no other tools that are used by same-sex couples to resolve disputes with an external party, probably with the exception of therapy and those kind of stuff, but not those instruments that are actually mentioned in the legislation as tools to resolve conflicts. So, to summarize this nice presentation, to what extent mediation is used by same-sex couples in Bulgaria, the answer is 0. I hope you remember that. I'm going to make a very short review on the legislation in Bulgaria, just to confirm once again the number 0. And go very briefly to same-sex couples in family law, in inheritance, in civil law, domestic violence, and then we're going to turn to mediation. We're going to start with family law. Thank you. So, as in other countries, actually, same-sex marriage is forbidden by constitution, because in the constitution we have the text that says that marriage is only a union by a woman and a man, and this is from the 1991, the Constitution in 1991, and that means that for us to legalize same-sex marriages, we actually need to as well change the Constitution. And then it's the same in the family code, that just repeats the Constitution, develops it a bit more. Yeah. The bad thing is that the family code that is relatively new in 2009, and Borislava will actually add a couple of words about that, does not in any way recognize same-sex partnerships or same-sex unions. There was a debate about it, at the end it didn't go through, so according to family law there is marriage and there is nothing else. And the only thing is that in some documents, like in the Domestic Violence Act and one more law that concerns compensation in cases of death, there is the phrase factual cohabitance, but it is not legally defined. And in Bulgaria, if you look grammatically how it is phrased, and also it is supported in the literature that it can still only apply for opposite-sex couples and not for same-sex couples. So even in those cases, same-sex couples cannot really appeal to this kind of texts. Yes, and as something that Borislava already mentioned, as well in the family code, it says that nobody can adopt can be adopted by two persons unless they are married. That means that there is no way for same-sex couples to adopt because they cannot be married. This is you.
Okay, so just to try to speak about the attempts actually to adopt a new family code and leave some doors open to legalize same-sex cohabitation or marriages. It started in 2008 when the government has suggested that the parliament should vote in favor of a new family code. And the new bill was supposed to introduce the registered partnerships, which means the cohabitation. In 2008 and in 2009 there were really many debates in national TV, in public space and so, and for first time we could actually see that there is a church in Bulgaria. Because church is completely anonymous and invisible. As I said, it's extremely secular country compared with neighboring Greece, Romania, Turkey. Religious institutions are also in Serbia, completely invisible, and they never take any position. But suddenly, somehow, they came. And they took a very strong position on LGBT issues. Everything became extremely politicized, and actually it was very, very well financed from abroad to pump up into developing of right-wing values. There were foundations. Exactly at this time, an interesting NGO came called Foundation for Development of Legislation, which was dealing mostly with human rights. So on the surface, there is a famous Bulgarian professor, Pushkarova, maybe Vladislav knows her, from the legal department. She actually argues that this suggestion for a family code, trying to introduce a registered cohabitation and even implicitly speaking about same-sex couples, is demonstrating the huge crisis of the liberal values in legislation. And she speaks that this is in contradiction with human rights and celebrating diversity, because if we try to speak about taking the gender identity out of the family concept by introducing homosexual marriages, we are actually opposing the right to demonstrate your gender identity within the family. And it's interesting because this debate has been very highly intellectualized, and really an intellectual legal elite was attracted, pumped up with some good scholarships from these political circles in order to introduce those ideas. And I do personally believe that this has been imported. It is not really, as they claim, illustrating the normal social evolution, and it's not really reflecting on the cultural development as much as it has been presented. So this also collided with the rise of the extreme right wing, the fascist parties in Bulgaria, who organized lots of debates with the LGBT activists, and who also managed to attract specific groups of people. I think this was also the time when they were entering parliament, right? The extreme right wing party. No?
Yeah.
But they were already present.
Yeah.
Okay. So this has been quite politicized. So unfortunately, on June 12, 2009, after 2 years of debating, the new family code was passed without the section information about registered partnership, of course, not just for the same-sex couples, but also for the heterosexual couples and so on. Which is not mentioned in the slide as a statistic, but I'll tell you that according to the newest research, December 2013, there are 800,000 people in Bulgaria living out of wedlock, and 43 to 48% of the children are born out of wedlock, which is comparable only with Scandinavian countries. Marriage is completely fading out as an institution, but we could still hear a lot in the public space that we have to defend traditional family, which I personally find quite ridiculous.
So, in conclusion, in regards to family law, same-sex couples don't exist. So far. We hope that in a couple of years we'll be able to tell you something else, but now that's what we need to say. A very short review on inheritance, as well as something very interesting and important for same-sex couples. Unfortunately, the inheritance law is very family-based, and since, according to family law, same-sex couples don't exist, they cannot really inherit themselves according to the general rules of the inheritance law. Of course, there is the exception of writing a will, but the thing is that it is very much limited by something that in the Bulgarian law is called a reserved part. And that means that if one of the partners have living parents or children, or I think siblings as well, part of their patrimonium should actually automatically go to their living parents, and they cannot, with a will, transfer it to somebody else. And it is a big part. In some cases, it's pretty much half of the patrimonium, so that limits a lot the rights of opposite-sex couple to actually be inherited, well, inherit each other. A couple of words about domestic violence. We have a specific domestic violence law, and it defines which are the groups of people that can actually seek the special protection that is provided by this law, because there are special provisions that you can use within this law, like legal aid, shelter, and things like that. But the group of people that can seek protection under this law are family members, ex-family members, and factual co-inhabitants. This is the groups between which domestic violence can emerge, and that's why only victims of this kind of violence can seek protection for this law. And since, as I already mentioned previously in the presentation, same-sex couples are none of this, according to Bulgarian law, they cannot actually search protection under this law. Of course, if the violence is a crime, they can be using the general way of prosecution, but not using the provisions of the Domestic Violence Act. Of course, the civil law, in civil law, any same-sex couples can enter in any kind of agreements among themselves like any other party, because it's the freedom of negotiation and freedom of agreement. But in this case, whenever they're trying to solve the dispute, actually the fact that they are in a relationship is not taken into account, because in legal terms they are not. So, but still this is the only opportunity for them to actually get into agreements, for same-sex couples to get into agreements and arrange somehow the economic or other rights and obligations among themselves. And a couple of words about mediation. We have a specific legislation on that. It's the Mediation Act that was voted in 2004, came into force in 2004. And Article 1 says that mediation is an alternative mechanism for resolving legal and non-legal issues, disputes. And this is actually the part that opens the door for same-sex couples to use mediation, because if it was only for legal issues, they would not be able to, because there is no legal relationship to actually be handled. Yes, subject of mediation can be other disputes in between persons and legal, so it is open pretty much for everybody, and this is another proof that it can be used as well by same-sex couples. previous slide. The tricky part with non-legal disputes solved by mediation is that if you want to have a mediated agreement enhanced, it needs to be approved by the court. So the parties agree on something, they conclude a mediated agreement, but if they wanted to have the obligatory power so they can search for their rights, it needs to be approved by the court. And the court needs to take into consideration whether everything that is agreed is according to law and according to the good morals. So the question is, if there is a same-sex couple agreement that goes to court, if the court will actually approve it, or it will find it against the law or against the good morals. And actually yesterday we came up with the idea to try out a case like that and just put an agreement into court, mediated agreement into court for approval, and see what would be the motives of the court. Because so far there is no case like this, but we thought, okay, let's create one and let's see. So we'll let you know.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. Yes, and in our research, as I said already, we have approached mediators associations, and they told us that they are not aware of a case of same-sex couple that actually were seeking agreement. Of course, this does not mean that it did not happen, but since it's something, and I apologize for the word that I'm going to use, but it would be something exotic, we thought that it would be something that people will share, and actually it would be known in the association. However, we will still search for it. Yes, and there are other tools for as well arbitration, but it is mainly for commercial law and, well, basically not really applicable. And court agreement that needs to have the same criteria to be according to law and to be following the morals. So we don't know if actually this is applicable. And this is Borislava.
We just going to say only a few words about how we started the field research. We made an attempt to interview judges, and it totally failed because they said there is nothing to discuss since it's completely out of legislation. Interviews with lawyers were more successful. We conducted few informal conversation and one formal interview. We formally interviewed 2 mediators and 2 gay couples. So, what was the position of the lawyer? Just to summarize, they said Bulgarian legislation does not adequately reflect on the social and legal needs of the LGBTQI community, that there is a need to revise the legislation since a number of rights of the LGBTQI community are violated with a lack of legal provision and rights protection, quite evidently, and that the present situation is conflicting a number of national anti-discrimination acts, because as you could see since 2003 they exist. The position of the mediators is that no formal experience with mediation, as we could see, is existing, but they have lots of non-formal observation and experiences. So we are just citing what they said. We need to acknowledge that there is a difference between disputes between same-sex couples and different-sex couples, and they clarify why. The nature of those disputes is different, not because LGBTQI people would experience intimacy differently, but because of the social pressure to them would be very different and produce very different power imbalances. And that's a very important point, I believe. The position of the same-sex couples, we are just citing a few phrases. They said, we desperately need a change in legislation, we need mediation services not necessarily legal, we need a change of cultural paradigms of understanding what is a family and how dynamic it is. We need to raise awareness within the LGBTQI community, because as we could see, they are not very eager to use mediation yet, or maybe they are not very aware. And we need more public outreach and campaigning.
And just to add to that, that didn't came up from the field research, but I was reading some analysis on the use of mediation in general, not only for same-sex couples, and the truth is that actually it is not so popular right now among the population, so it's the same as that for same-sex couples that have other reasons to actually go to mediation. Just a couple of words, what we will be focusing on the research so far, and then we are closing. In terms of the literature, we will be still searching for analysis of mediation, and especially those on non-legal issues, because that's what the same-sex couple mediation would look like currently in Bulgaria. Analysis on family law and potential constructions, because in the literature there are suggestions on how this should be constructed in a way that it is acceptable for society, political parties to vote it. And what are the social attitudes, what is the level of debate, and how is this going to be reflected in the next years. In regards to lawyers, we'll be searching on what is their attitude in general in working with same-sex couples and support the resolvement of their dispute. What are their needs in terms of competences, what they need to know and can do so that they can better support this process, and what is their attitude towards mediation as a tool for same-sex conflict resolution. In regards to mediators, we were thinking to as well check the attitudes, their attitudes in terms of resolving disputes of same-sex couples, and again, what are their needs, what competences do they need so that they can provide mediation for same-sex couple if they need something additional, which, well, we believe they do. And last, in regards to same-sex couples, what we'll be searching for is what is the natures and the reasons for the disputes that they would potentially try to solve through mediation. What is their attitudes towards the possibility to resolve disputes through mediation, and what are their expectations towards the way that mediation will go in a way that it will accommodate their interest and they would, well, feel comfortable to actually seek this kind of support, or if they believe that other mechanisms for resolving disputes would actually be more suitable for their resolving of their disputes. And that's it.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for these three nice presentations. Any questions? Domande? Marika, do we have? Marika? Yeah, of course.
A question to the Bulgarian colleagues. And we understand very well that in Bulgarian there is not legislation about same-sex couples. But I want to know if there are sentences or other decisions in this field, or nothing at all.
This is the request that we made with the courts. We asked for cases that are actually dealing with this, and what they said is no. As I said, it doesn't necessarily mean that it doesn't exist, but that's what most probably it means.
Okay, next one.
Good morning. I would like to know if in your countries there is visibility of same-sex couples and rainbow families. I want to know, in Italy we have no legislation to protect same-sex couples and families. But we are very present in media and tribunals, courts, etc. So we are fighting very hard. I want to know in your country what happened.
Okay, I just want to say that the most famous pop star in Bulgaria is a drag queen. It's called Aziz. It's the most famous person who was supposed to run for a president even. So, but that's a drag queen. And there is a huge amount of public figures who are openly gay. They came out a long time ago, so it's they're quite present.
Yeah, we have legally recognized life partnership, and there are families, and only as of this year they have more rights and wide rights. However, families with children, and those were same-sex families, existed before, and they were discussing about their problems in public.
I think in Hungary there are gay lesbian individuals, but not so much couples. I mean, you don't see on TV shows couples speaking about their issues, even though there is a movement of rainbow families in Hungary, they're not very present, and especially not present with their children. So they're very hesitant to be publicly appearing as parents with their children for many reasons, being afraid, but also kind of out of protection for their children, things like that. So I think what showed in the beginning with the maps, it's very clear that the visibility and social acceptance of same-sex relationships in Italy is a lot more progressed than in Hungary, or I think in most of the Eastern European countries, but our legislation is better, so. It's a tricky situation, because you have the legislation, but if people don't use it, then what is it worth?
Any other questions? Okay, since we are a bit behind scheduled, Marika, do you want to say something?
I would like to thank you for the wonderful presentations and for the positive vibes, in particular from the Bulgarian team, because we share, Italy and Bulgaria share this very insane legal system and insane political attitude to same-sex couples and same-sex parenting. But I've seen that you are very positive, and thank you so much for this. Thank you all for the amazing, detailed, accurate presentation, and for opening our eyes on your realities. Thank you so much. And abbiamo, diciamo, 9 minuti e mezzo per il caffè, il break, e poi ci vediamo qui perché è il vostro momento. Noi ormai abbiamo dato e quindi